Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you.
You too.
I'm
You're,
looking at two different screens. So I'm looking here and I'm looking here. I've got you on my big screen and on my phone screen as well.
yeah, it's good to see
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you
Oh,
too. So we've got a minute or two before we start, so we can just chat for a minute or
okay.
two before start time. So how are things? Are you in Uzbekistan right now?
No, I'm in London. My husband and daughter are still in Uzbekistan, but I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in April, so I'm in London for treatment.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I have less hair than last time we spoke.
Still
But
beautiful though.
thank you. But I'm doing pretty well, all things considered. So yeah, I
Yeah.
made it through surgery. I'm in the middle of what I hope are final rounds of chemo. So
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Our thoughts and prayers to you for sure.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know people will be trickling in, but I do like to start on time. And I see Amber's up on stage with us. Hi, Amber.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
going to
you
have a
too.
nice chat today. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan McBeth, and I'm here today to chat with co-host Amber, as well as award-winning author and fan favorite author Jennifer Steil, who's going to chat about her beautiful book, Exile Music. And not only is the book beautifully written, but I love the jacket too. So we'll have to talk a little bit about that because I do love that book cover. Uh, Today's fireside chat is part two in a 5-part series that we're doing. We're calling "Thankful for Reading," books that we just think are interesting to read and make us think about things to be thankful for this holiday season. And we hope you do pick it up and read it. If you can pick it up at your favorite bookstore, at a library, you can purchase a copy from Adventures by the Book. Amber has typed in the link in the fortune cookie in the center of your screen where you can go to our website and purchase a copy as well. Our approximate 45-minute chat today is intended to be interactive, so please feel free anytime you'd like. If you want to save it till the end, you can, but if you have a pressing question or comment in the middle of our conversation, feel free to hop up on stage with us and ask away. We love to hear from you. For those of you who are listening in our public profile page or on our social media channels, welcome to those of you as well, and we're glad you're here today. So let's go ahead and get started. Jennifer Steil, as I mentioned, is an award-winning author and journalist who has been living in Uzbekistan and many countries. She's currently in London. Exile Music is her third book, which was released in May 2020. It's won multiple awards, including the grand prize in the 2020 Islands Book Awards, and was named a finalist for the 2021 Lambda Literary Lesbian, that's a mouthful, Lambda Literary Lesbian Fiction Award. It's based on an unexplored slice of World War II history that I didn't know much about at all. It's the captivating story of a young Jewish girl whose family flees refined and urbane Vienna for safe harbor in the mountains of Bolivia. And I wanted to read, I thought the quote on the cover of the book was so beautiful. And since it's Jean Kwok, who's just an international best-selling author whom I adore and is so talented, she says, "The book captures the delicate rhythm of one girl's coming of age while driven by war and exile. gorgeous and powerful. And I totally concur. It is gorgeous and powerful. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Susan. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. We're glad to have you here. So anyone who attends our program knows that we like to first talk to authors about before they were famous, successful writers, and where you got your started in terms of your passion or your desire to read, to write, who may have inspired you along the way. And so I wanted to ask you about that, if there was somebody in your life, and go back in time a little bit. You're not very old, so you don't have to go back too far, but talk about those influences or what inspired you to read and write at a younger age.
I guess I have to give my parents credit for that. They read to us a lot when we were kids. And because they read to us every single day, I was reading by the time I was 4. And then they got me a library card. And I happened to live walking distance from the library. And the librarian happened to get to know me because I kept showing up. And I was always carrying as many as I could walk back down the streets of Groton, Massachusetts, carrying like I think 11. I would carry a little tower home. So my parents also got me a set of these books called the Books of Knowledge, and they're like, do you know the Books of Knowledge?
We
They're
had a set too.
Did you? Like they
Yeah.
were the best thing ever. They were,
I love
they're
them.
like encyclopedias, but so much better, and with illustrations and history and fiction and fairy tales. And this, I would just remember reading about how sugar was made and finding that fascinating. And it was just, I loved reading those. So I guess that was a formative experience. And as far as writing was concerned, I mean, I think, I lived largely in books. I was a very awkward child with no social skills. But I kept a journal because that was, one of the only places I talked to people. I mean, I always had a friend, at least one friend, but I was a quiet child.
Yeah, well, the Book of Knowledge, I haven't thought of that for a long time, but back in the day, which Amber is way too young to remember, but we used to have these traveling salesmen that would come to our doors and they'd sell you either a book of knowledge or an encyclopedia. And we were lucky because my dad ordered both. He was very big on, having
Wow.
information available. And I remember thumbing through those. And my thing is I always wanted to thumb through and find different countries and learn about it. I wanted to travel to all these exotic places someday. And I loved those books, especially the maps. I loved looking at the maps.
Yeah, and I remember reading about I don't remember the names of the princes who were suffocated by King Richard III. There was a story about a history of them. And because I'd been reading that story and how these 2 young princes were murdered by having their pillows put over their heads, I wouldn't sleep with a pillow on my bed after that. I was like, someone could come in and put a, put a pillow over my head. I mean, not that I was an heir to a throne or anything, but, um, yeah, all
Well,
kinds of treasure.
you're getting quite an education. You're getting quite an education just in your travels. I mean, you've lived all over the world. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that experience has been like? I find it fascinating.
Sure. I've been very fortunate to have been able to live in the places I've lived. So I left the US in 2006 to take a job as the editor in chief of a newspaper in Sana'a, Yemen. And it was a Yemeni newspaper. And it was while I was running that newspaper, I thought this would make a great book. And I took a lot of notes, and I'd write for an hour every morning over coffee before I go to the newspaper because I wouldn't get home until 3 in the morning. And at that time, I went straight to bed. So that was the hardest year of my life, but also the most rewarding, getting to know my Yemeni reporters and learning everything they had to teach me. Was one of the most magical years of my life. I loved Yemen. It's probably, I loved all the countries in which we've lived, but Yemen holds a special place in my heart. And after I'd been there for a year, I met my husband there. Another reason it's also magical to me. And my first book came out while I was living in Yemen. And then because my husband was a British diplomat, it's his job that has taken us from country to country since then. So we lived in Yemen for 4 years. My daughter was born while we lived there. And then we were eventually evacuated. So I was kidnapped when I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. And then my husband was attacked by a suicide bomber. And then they decided that perhaps the security situation in the country warranted my daughter and I getting evacuated. So we were sent out of the country and we had nowhere to go. We didn't have a home outside of Yemen. So she was 6 months old, and we rented a flat in Jordan where we waited out the rest of my husband's posting, which was just another 4 months or so. But I was a brand new mother, and I hadn't really planned on doing it alone in a country I'd never been to. Um, but we managed and made some good friends in Jordan. And then we were in London with my husband again, and we were there for a couple of years before he got a job in Bolivia, which inspired Exile music. And that was really exciting. He was working for the EU. This was back when Britain was part of the EU. And he loved working there, and we loved living in Bolivia. And that was a pretty extraordinary place for my daughter to grow up. She didn't realize that she wasn't Bolivian until we came back to London when she was 7.
That's fabulous. I love that.
Yeah. And then we were back here for 3 years, and then we moved to Uzbekistan in August 2019. So, and since then, things have been chaos for the same reason they've been chaos for so many people. The pandemic hit, my daughter and I were evacuated, kept apart from my husband for a year. And then we got back there, and then I was evacuated for medical reasons a year ago. And so I've actually been living apart from them for a year, not on purpose, but because we can't figure out any other way to do it. I get free medical care in England. So,
Yeah, and I know I want to get to your current book, but I'm just curious because your travels have inspired previous books, and so is there you've got so many things to write about. I'm wondering, is there something percolating? Are you writing now or in the next one?
I am writing now. In fact, writing is saving my life right now. I don't really know how I'd be coping with living apart from my family. And I have a 12-year-old daughter, and it's
Mm.
kind of excruciating not to be with her. But actually, one of the greatest things is yesterday she rang me and she said, "Mommy, I just finished the best book and you have to read it right now so we can talk about it." And I thought that's like the best thing my daughter could say to me, like the
That is the
best.
best thing. So you have to tell us what the book is then.
Well, it was My Sister Rosa was the book.
Okay.
So I already have a copy. I looked over there because it's sitting on the bed waiting for me because I get so excited when my daughter wants to talk to me about books. I'm like, yeah, of course I'll read it. But I'm sorry, you did ask me a question. Oh, about things inspiring books. Right. Right. So my time at the newspaper inspired my first book, which was a memoir about my experience of running that newspaper and my relationship with my reporters and all the horrendous mistakes I made and the culture clashes and all those sorts of things. And then my second book was originally inspired. My second book was The Ambassador's Wife, which starts off with a kidnapping that happens very much like it happened to me, except she doesn't get let go, at least not for a while. So I started out, I already had that written because the British Foreign Office, after that happened to me, made me write down exactly what happened. So they had a record of it. And so I already had a draft of it. And I thought, well, I don't want this to go to waste. I got to do something with this. And so then I thought, what if I hadn't been released? What if I had a toddler at home? What if I were married to an ambassador and then he lost his posting because his wife was kidnapped and he wasn't considered impartial? What if the country was on the verge of civil war? What if she's held, behind a mountain pass that's blocked by avalanches? And all those things I made happen just to kind of up the stakes. And so that book happened as a long series of what if questions that didn't happen to me. So it's a fictional story, but it does start off with a kidnapping.
So
And
is that
then,
what you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, go on.
I was
Yeah.
just going to ask, is that why you chose to fictionalize it? Because you could answer all these what if questions.
Yes. And also, the thing is, I had just moved in with my husband relatively recently. And because he was then the British ambassador to Yemen, everything that happened in our house was utterly fascinating. And I couldn't write any of it. Without my husband losing his job or me losing my marriage or both. And so I thought, I can't write the truth anymore. I have to make stuff up. But it was a context that I understood. And so the book takes place in a context I understood. It takes place in this very weird diplomatic world. Um, but it's not my story. It deals with a lot of issues that are near and dear to my heart, like freedom of expression and East-West relationships and white savior complex and all kinds of things like that. So,
Yeah, and I'm curious. I want to get on to your book, but I just have one last question that I'm curious about. Is I was thinking when you said you were a young woman, I don't forgot how old you were when you moved to Yemen.
I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I was young compared to now, but I was 37 when I moved there.
Oh, 37. Okay. Because I was wondering, as a younger woman, I mean, probably most young women nowadays don't even know where Yemen is. So, were you prepared to just, I mean, obviously you were because you went, but what did you think about did you, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that, did you like have to give it deep thought, or did you just say, hey, this is an incredible opportunity, I'm going, and that's it?
In a way, I think it almost had more to do with my frustration about where I was in my. I mean, I'd been working as a journalist for I don't know how long, a decade at least by then, and I was writing for a news magazine, and it was a great job. I don't have complaints about the job, but I've been doing it for 5.5 years, which for me is the longest I'd ever worked anywhere, and I was ready to move on. And also, I was frustrated that because when I was doing journalism all day long, when I came home, I just didn't have the energy to sit back down and write fiction. I just didn't have any time for my own writing. It's all my writing energy went into journalism. And um, I was offered this opportunity by a friend of mine from high school who wrote to me from Yemen and said, would you come train the journalists here? And I did a training there and then at a Yemeni newspaper, and my staff and I really hit it off. And then the editor of the newspaper said, could you stay and be the editor in chief? And I did turn it down at first. I said, no, I have a rent stabilized apartment in Manhattan. Like I have to go back and I've got a job, and they were offering me 12,000 a year. And I said, well, I can't really live on that, and he said, well, you can here. And he was right, because at that time, I managed to save 5,000 of that in that first year, which is more than I ever saved the whole time I lived in Manhattan. So, um, it's funny. But anyway, so I think I thought, I need my life to move in a different direction. And I certainly never planned on moving to Yemen, but moving to Yemen is what happened to me, and what was offered to me. And so I thought, well, this could be a total disaster, and but it is going to be interesting. And at very least, I'm going to have a good story to tell out of this, no matter what happens, which was true. But I also, made some of my closest friends and met my husband and had a child and wrote a book, and I didn't anticipate any of that. So it was a good move, really. I
Yeah.
owe Yemen a lot.
Lucky for us readers too. Well, it reminds me of there's another writer, Lisa Napoli, who had kind of a similar type of experience. Is that she was kind of going through a midlife thing where, what do I do with my life? She was working for NPR, I think, as a journalist,
Mm.
and she met some guy at a party, and he said, hey, I just came back from Bhutan, and I'm going to start up a radio station there. They want someone who can do that, and do you want to do it? And she said, oh my God, yes. And she dropped everything and moved to Bhutan. And I thought,
Yeah.
who does that? That's kind of like you just dropping everything and going to Yemen. And I think it's so incredible, and it's so exotic. And I think, oh, I wish that would happen to me. I could do something so adventurous and exotic like that. But then I wonder, would I really do that? Would I drop my daytime life and what I'm comfortable and used to, and do something like that? Obviously, at this point in my life, I wouldn't. But back then, I probably would. I think it's amazing.
I mean, I was scared. I didn't know that much about the country. I was just starting to learn Arabic, and I mean, the learning curve was steep. Um, and it was hard. It was hard, but I felt that the greatest benefit of being there was it was a place so unlike anywhere else I'd ever been, that it challenged everything I believed about the world and all my assumptions about the world. And it was the first time I actually recognized how growing up in the US had shaped me and made me have the beliefs that I had. And I started realizing, oh, I've been formed by the country I come from. And then, I feel like ever since then, I've been trying to kind of unform myself and reform myself in different constellations that suit me better now that I live seemingly in many countries. So,
Yeah. And do you speak Arabic? How many languages do you speak?
none as well as my husband and daughter, I have to say. But I speak French and Spanish pretty well. My Arabic was conversational when I lived there. I spent 4 years studying it, but it was the hardest language. I loved it. It's really super fun to write. I remember my nephew when he was young called it the backwards language because you write from right to left.
Yeah.
So I really love studying Arabic, but if you asked me to come up with something right now, I'm not sure that I could. I mean, except for a few words. But things come back to you. Like recently, my old Spanish teacher in London came over for the afternoon, and I thought, oh, this is going to be exhausting because I'm going to have to speak Spanish all afternoon. And it wasn't exhausting. It just all came back to me. It much more easily than I thought it would because I haven't really spoken it that much since we lived in Bolivia. But it's all still in there somewhere. And my daughter thinks she's lost her Spanish. And um, so she's like, "Oh, I wish I could still speak Spanish." And then so I said a sentence in Spanish, and she said, "Oh, that means I don't want to play with you." And I was like, "See,
Uh,
still in there."
Yeah, I love learning foreign languages, and it's funny because my son married into an Iranian American family, and I thought, oh, I'm going to
Ooh,
learn Farsi. I want to go up
sure.
there next time and speak to them and wow them. And so I took lessons for a short while, and after a couple weeks, I could barely say one simple greeting. It was so difficult. And I used that greeting. I repeated it over and over in my brain on the next flight up there so I could remember it to repeat it to them. I was so proud of myself. They hadn't a clue what I said. So I
Oh,
kind of gave up after that. But I think it's incredible that you do that. So I could talk to you forever, but we have to get to the book because that's the whole purpose here is to talk about your beautiful Exile music. So without giving any spoilers, because we want people to read your book, can you give us a synopsis of the book?
sure. The book opens in Vienna, which is where my family grows up. My protagonist starts out as a young girl. She's between the ages of 6 and 10 when the book opens, and her parents are both musicians. Her mother's an opera singer. Her father plays viola with the Vienna Philharmonic. She grows up around music, not only the classical music that her parents perform, but also the popular music of the day. So music plays a very strong thematic role in the book. She grows up, she's born on the same day as another girl in her apartment building, and they grow up best friends. And Orly is Jewish, her best friend Annalisa is not. And as the Nazis are closing in on Austria, and the world is getting more frightening for Orly every day, she and Annalisa start creating this imaginary world together. And so their relationship largely forms it is initiated by creating this world together. And then they grow up together and are super entwined, until Orly and her parents need to flee. And they don't end up being able to get out of the country until 1939 because it was incredibly difficult for Jews to get visas anywhere else. And by 1938, there were only 3 countries in the world still offering visas to Jews, and Bolivia was one of them. The others were the Dominican Republic and Japan occupied Shanghai. So my family ended up in La Paz, and I got the idea for the story when I was living in Bolivia because I met these survivors who there's still some survivors alive in La Paz, and I met them and heard their stories and couldn't find anything written about them other than some memoirs. Um, and it just seemed like a part of the diaspora that had been overlooked for a very long time. And having lived in La Paz myself, I found it, even with the very privileged way I came to La Paz, it's quite a tricky place to live, based on the altitude alone, because La Paz is at 12,000 feet, 4,000 meters. It's very high. It can be quite tough to live there. Some people can't tolerate the altitude at all. Some people get sick. We were fine, thankfully. But I was imagining, okay, if I'd lost everyone I loved, my career, my home, my money, my photographs, my one of my children. And then I ended up in the middle of the Andes in a culture I didn't understand or the language I didn't speak. What would that have been like? And that seemed like fertile ground to explore. And so I wanted to start telling that story from the eyes of someone who was young enough to move there and adapt in a more flexible way than an adult could have. And part of that came from watching the way my daughter has adapted to various countries. So in Bolivia, we were 2.5. She was 2.5 when we moved there. And within a couple months, she was speaking Spanish. Kids just absorb languages like sponges. And so she adapted in a much different way than I adapted. And so I was interested in how Orly would make a home for herself there and whether it would become her home or whether she'd return to Austria. I was curious. There's also, the book also goes into how she discovers her sexuality. It goes into the fact that there were Nazis who ended up following the Jews there, Klaus Barbie among them. And so Klaus Barbie really was in Bolivia at the time of later on in my novel. And some of the survivors that I met in La Paz had run into Klaus Barbie on the streets. And I thought, what can it have been like to have come so far from your home to escape the Nazis, to end up in the middle of the Andes and suddenly find out that Klaus Barbie is down the street from you? I mean, I just can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been. And so I was interested in, okay, if I were there, how would I have reacted to the fact that there were Nazis near me? How would my parents have reacted? How would I have wanted people to react? And I kind of split there's more than one way I would have wanted to react. And I split those reactions among different characters so they could argue it out. And I didn't have to make a decision. So it is a coming of age story, but it also deals a lot with the ways we cope with trauma. Poetry is another way Orly copes with trauma. Her poetry teacher says, pick 2 things that are as far apart as you can imagine, like that have no relationship to each other. And she picks something in Austria and something in Bolivia. And then she has to kind of write the bridge between them. And it's a way she learns to connect her past to her present. But she also takes up a Bolivian instrument. And by taking up a Bolivian instrument, that helps her to involve herself more with the culture in which she's now living. And her father as well adapts through music. He begins teaching some Bolivian students, but he also learns from them. And he finds himself freed in a way because he's been playing the same repertoire for years. And now he's learning this whole other kind of music exists. These whole other instruments exist. And it's only the mother who struggles to adapt. She, as a singer, first of all, it's quite difficult to sing opera at 12,000 feet. There's not a lot of oxygen, but also because singing uses your body in a way that using an instrument doesn't. And for her, the act of singing is an act of joy. You might be singing a sad song, but the act of producing that sad song is an act of joy for her. And after she leaves her son behind in Europe, she can no longer feel that joy and can no longer sing. And so her whole family adapts in different ways. And eventually, a relative visits them and reacts to trauma in a different way. But so it's a lot about how various people in her family and, adapt to their own trauma and find their way to make a home in Bolivia. And I spent 5 years researching it because I wanted to create a context that anyone who'd lived through this time would recognize, but with my fictional story in it.
Well, you did an amazing job, and it's so rich in so many ways. I mean, so many things to think about. I was thinking to myself what a perfect book club read this is because there's so many themes and topics. I mean, just little things like I never even thought about opera singers singing at 12,000 feet. I mean, who ponders that?
I know.
Yeah. And so that just reminds me that you're a member of Novel Network, which means that book clubs can go onto novelnetwork.com and look at your schedule and schedule a book club visit with you right there on the spot, either Zoom, Facebook, Skype. You love talking to book clubs, I know. And I think this
Yes.
is a really great read for book clubs and libraries to pick. So, but I want to talk a little bit about why you think it is. I know that you moved to Bolivia, so you had personal experience and met refugees, but why, with all the refugee stories that have been told through the years since the war, why do you think nobody's ever focused on Bolivia? I mean, I've never heard of that until your book.
I think because, I mean, it is quite remote, and it's that's a good question. I'm not sure I actually know the whole answer to that, because I think perhaps they were more isolated from the rest of the world, and because some people, they didn't stay there after the war. A lot of people, Leo Spitzer wrote a memoir called Hotel Bolivia. That's a beautiful memoir. He grew up in Bolivia till he was 10, at which point he moved to the US. And a lot of people moved to either the US or to Israel, or to other places that were slightly easier to live in South America. So they moved to, say, Brazil or Argentina or Venezuela. And perhaps, I mean, the thing is, not everyone's a writer, too. And so these people all ended up in different parts of the world. They weren't together. And some of them might not have wanted to remember their time in Bolivia. Some might have remembered it really fondly. Almost everyone that I've talked to, I talk to book groups all the time, and a lot of survivors have turned up, a lot of whom have actually spent time in Bolivia or grew up there, and they loved it, and are in love with the country. But I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because everyone's so scattered. I hadn't met Jewish refugees who'd come through Bolivia before I lived there. And maybe because a lot of them stayed in South America and didn't come to the States. And but it's hard to know why no one wrote this. People did write memoirs, but a lot of them were written for their families to have a record of what happened to them. But I did read I hope almost everything that was published by anyone who had ever lived there during the years I was writing about.
No, you painted such a realistic picture, and you can tell that you had experience there, and the experiences with your daughter assimilating, and it was really, really well done.
Thank you.
And the other thing in the book is that music plays a big role. And I'm curious, are you yourself a musician, or why did you choose the music angle?
I would love so much to be a musician.
Me too.
I I think maybe the reason I'm a writer is it allows me to vicariously do these other jobs that I wish I could do. I mean, I would love to be a composer. I'd love to be able to play an instrument, and I my talents do not lie in that direction, alas. And The Ambassador's Wife was about a visual artist, because I also can't draw or paint or do anything like that. And I'm now writing about a sculptor, which I also can't do. And so I think, I pick professions that are interesting to me personally, I suppose. And because they're things that mean something to me also as an audience member. I love music, I love art, I love theater, I love all of those things. And so I'm always looking for a way to selfishly pursue my own passions while while telling whatever story I'm telling. And it actually made sense that they were musicians, because there were a lot of musicians that came from Europe to Bolivia, and a lot of actors and artists who came. So it was a very artistic community, who came over there. And so it was quite realistic. And also, actually, the other reason that I ended up making my characters musicians was one of the first people I met was a man named John Galanter, who's a violin player and was once the conductor of the Bolivian Philharmonic Orchestra, and was familiar with the history of the orchestra, which did start in 1945, as I mentioned it in the book. And so talking with John, about his passion for music and for the orchestra in La Paz, and he took me to a piano concert in La Paz, and this pianist, I mean, again, 12,000 feet, right? And by the time she finished playing this concert, she was the color of chalk. She was pouring sweat, and like her hands were shaking. I mean, it's when you're performing concert pianist level music at that height, I mean, it's exhausting. and so incredible to watch.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because this is really random, but I was at the Elton John concert last night in San Diego, and I
Oh,
was lucky enough to be seated in row two, so I could watch his face. I could see his face, and he's 75, and he's but the passion and energy and of his singing and his piano playing is so intense. He got up at one point and kind of, he joked and leaned over his piano like that performance had killed him, which I'm sure it really did take a toll on him because he just gave so much to it. So I can see what you're saying.
yeah. I mean, it's yes.
So your protagonist Orly, young Orly, so she lives a pretty idyllic life in Vienna until the Nazis invade. And
Yes.
then she's not only have to struggle with her family's identity as Jews, but also kind of her, her own sexuality. And so I'm wondering, how did you write about the two and mesh them and intertwine them to address both issues of identity crisis that she was having?
Right. So when I first started writing, I started the book with the scene with Orly and Annalisa creating their imaginary world together. And I did that because I thought it'd be more interesting than watching one child do it alone. But so I didn't know where their relationship was going or if it was just a friendship or what was going to happen. And as the more I wrote about Orly, she just I mean, I think of these people as, I don't know, members of my family or people I know. It's really hard for me to think of them as people I made up because they have ceased to be that for me. But Orly kind of took on a life of her own. And, she went to the opera with her mother and saw a woman who was wearing a tuxedo and started asking questions about her and why she lives with another woman. And her mother said, oh, they're roommates. And then I started reading some lesbian books from that era. And I think that contemporary audiences or writers or people in general seem to think that, we always think we're the generation that invented sex and that before us, everyone is very puritanical. But, people have always been doing that. And that's why we're here. And, gay sex has always been there as well. It just wasn't as well documented. But, there was a really hopping gay scene in Germany and Austria in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. Well, 40s, I don't know as much about the 40s because my characters were gone by then. So I had moved to my attention to Bolivia. But I ended up finding this book called The Scorpion, which is a trilogy written by a lesbian author. And reading that book was fascinating. Just the way that lesbian life was written about in the 1930s and the way these women met each other and the kinds of relationships they had and the drama of these relationships. And so it was easy for me to have Orly stumble across that book at some point because it was published around that time and it would have been available to her in German. And so I did that is another thing I did is for research is looked up, okay, what books came out in the 20s and 30s? What would Orly have read? And then I looked for the ones that had English translations, read those. I do not speak German. Um, so don't tell anyone.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I know Amber's chomping at the bit to ask you some questions, so I just have one
okay.
last question for you that I was
Okay.
curious about, because you talked about it personally, but your character also goes through it. Is that reestablishing your identity? So you move to La Paz, Bolivia, and you become kind of a pseudo Bolivian, but her home is Vienna, Austria, which is calling to her, but it's not really the same place anymore post-war. So, how do you write about the struggle between what defines home and where she would end up? And I guess that's a personal question too, because I guess she would have had the same, especially your daughter. Where is home? What do you consider home?
This is a question I think about pretty much every day. I seriously almost every day because for the past year I've been staying in friends' houses, going from flat to flat in London. And it's kind of a smaller version of what we've been doing, living in different countries for 4 years at a time. But part of me thinks, okay, life will begin when I'm back in my own space, when I'm back with my family, when I'm home. And then I have to think, I can't put my life on hold until I'm in an actual physical home. I have to just allow myself to say, okay, I'm going to go home now and have it mean just wherever I am. I mean, for me, I've often described it as just wherever my husband and daughter are, because we're the only consistency in each other's lives. And of course, I'm now missing from their life. But for my characters, I mean, that's part of the struggle Orly goes through over the course of the book, is to figure out what home means to her. Is home the country where she was born and started forming as a human, but the country that also violently rejected her and tried to kill her and everyone else like her? And I mean, I think I was also influenced by talking to this man, Guillermo Wiener, he was born Wilhelm Wiener in Austria and moved to Bolivia when he was 8. And I interviewed him several times. And he said, there was no force on earth that could convince him to go back to Austria. And he said Austria had finally reached out to him to apologize for murdering all of his people and inviting him back. And he said, I'm Bolivian. I want nothing to do with Austria ever again. And I mean, he was quite firm about that with me. I am Bolivian. He was 83. He was like, I'm Bolivian. I have now spent my life here. I married in Bolivia. My children grew up in Bolivia. I am Bolivian. So that was his decision. And I had to figure out what Orly's decision would be. Would she decide that she did want to go back? I mean, Orly's mother, adults struggle more again, because Orly's mother had spent most of her life in Austria. Orly had spent most of her life in Bolivia. So I mean, it's hard because, again, it's more than just a landscape. It's more than just borders. It's more than just a geographical location. Home is where we not just feel happy, but where we feel like we can be ourselves in the truest way, maybe. And for me, that's with my family. But I've also had to learn, I mean, the three of us have had to learn that to make home wherever. Theodore has finally gotten to the age where they say, enough. I want to be in one place for like a while now. But fortunately, my husband's about to retire. Fortunately for Theo, my husband's about to retire, and then we will be in one place for a while till we get bored. Sorry, that was long-winded, but
No, it's a good answer. And you're just so fascinating to talk to. I feel like the time has passed so quickly, and Amber has some questions, and I want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, you can pop up now, invite yourself up on stage and ask Jennifer some questions. I'm going to zip it because I have so many other questions for you, and I want to give other people a chance. So feel free to invite yourself up on stage, but while you're doing that, I'm going to turn it over to Amber because I know she has questions for you.
okay.
Hi, Jennifer. It's so
Hi.
wonderful to meet you. I've just been taking notes while you've been talking because your life is so fascinating. And I commend you for your bravery and adventurous spirit in writing. It's definitely reflected in that. So thank you for that. And I thought it was so interesting you talking about the musical aspect of your book because I played the clarinet for 8 years competitively. And so it was a really big part of my life. And so it was very interesting to hear, you talk a little bit about music in that way. So thank you for that.
Wonderful.
But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the writing process just because there might be some writers in the audience, including myself. So I wanted to pick your brain on some questions. But for you, what does the writing process look like? Do you have to have a schedule? Do you have to have an outline? Are you a plotter? Just curious about that in general.
The writing process for me looks like chaos. I am not a plotter. Okay. If I know how something's going to end, I will be too bored to write it. Because for me, the most exciting thing is not knowing where it's going and seeing where things take me. So each of my books, they're three very different books. I wrote them in different ways. Like the memoir, I pretty much did write chronologically, but I had to find an organizing structure that wasn't just chronology. The Ambassador's Wife, I wrote in little tiny scenes, and I didn't even write them in order. So I wrote all these little scenes I knew had to be part of the story for some reason. Little tiny scenes. And then I'd figure out, oh, there's this one's, and then I'd shuffle them around, kind of like playing cards or quilting pieces. And I'd move them around until they made sense. And then I'd send it to my editor, and she would take them apart and slightly rejigger them the way she thought they made more sense. And then we'd realize there was a scene missing, and then I'd have to fill in the scene. But that was much kind of more of a puzzle piecey book, partly because it is a kidnapping. It's a little bit of a literary thriller. But with Exile Music, it was very slow because I had to do so much research while I was writing. And I had to do the two of them at the same time. And so a lot of the ideas came from research, like researching the Vienna Philharmonic. I mean, don't even get me started on the horrific history of the Vienna Philharmonic. But, I got off on a tangent with them. And then I get into researching the history of this Austrian holiday and read some PhD thesis on it, and then had to stick that in the book somewhere. But, so I had things I knew had to happen, and there is a chronology to this book. And I wanted to get my characters as quickly as possible from Vienna to Bolivia, because of course the Vienna part had been written about so much by such good authors that I didn't really want to compete in the Vienna territory. I wanted to get my characters to Bolivia, which hadn't been written about. But there were things I had to touch on. First of all, I needed to create their lives beforehand, so we had a contrast. So I had to think very carefully, okay, so what do I want to include in the beginning? I just need to give a sense of their lives, of the musical nature of their lives, and then show kind of the menace increasing, and then how they got out. And I also had to touch on the Anschluss when Germany took over Austria. And I also had to touch on Kristallnacht, when all the synagogues are burned and things like that. So there were certain points, historical points, I had to make sure I mentioned it, or it would have been weird. And then did that. But I mean, I think I am disorganized. I mean, all right. So I do try to keep something of a regular schedule. I do write most days. Right now I'm bizarrely writing more than ever, partly because I'm away from my family, but also partly because it's a way I cope with everything. So I'll get up in the morning, I'll make tea or coffee or whatever it is I'm drinking those days, and sit down to write immediately, either in a notebook or on my computer, but always first thing. And I have to stop myself from looking at the phone. I don't look at email. I need to write when there's nothing else in my brain, and when the news has not started to depress me, all that stuff. So I often start by writing in my journal as a warm-up. I think of that as a warm-up, like, okay, I get some words down. And journal is low stress. No one else is going to read it. I'm just going to write this. Yeah, it's just for me. And so I do that, and then I feel productive already, right? And so then I can kind of turn to, right now I've been writing a series of angry essays about the total lack of screening for ovarian cancer. And so I've been fired up about that and writing essays, and one of which was just accepted by the Kenyon Review. So I'm all excited about that.
Congrats.
Yeah,
that's so wonderful.
You're the first people I've told, other than my husband.
I feel honored.
So, yeah, I'm really excited because it's important, I think. So I do that, and I do that until I suddenly realize that I've been up for 4 hours and I haven't eaten anything. And then I run downstairs and get some lemon juice and a protein ball and come back. And but then I need to exercise because I get really antsy. So I'm not someone who can just lock themselves in a room for 8 hours and write straight. I am not one of those people. I can't do it. I can't be in a chair for that long. I am completely hyperactive. I'm obsessed with movement. I walk 8 miles a day. So I just can't be at a desk all day. So I have to write in shorter bursts. And the other thing I have discovered personally, is that if I think, okay, I have to wait until I have a magical 4-hour block of free time magically opening up in order to write, well, I'll never get anything done, because magical 4 block hours of time, they just don't happen, right? To almost any of us. So you have to give yourself permission to be like, okay, today, sorry, I keep hitting my desk and then we jiggle.
It's all good.
But if you say, you know what, I'm going to write for half an hour before breakfast, those half an hours add up. You start writing half an hour on an essay, you write half an hour on that essay the next day, and you keep going. Well, you'll have an essay by the end of a week. So I think that for me, it helps me to know that no matter how short a time, I never think, oh, I only have 15 minutes is not really worth starting anything or looking at anything. It's always worth looking at it. Like, even if you just kind of remind yourself what you've already written, it's worth it. Like, those short bursts are worth it. And so the other thing, this is my other little like hack that I'm excited about. I'm not a technological person at all. So I was getting frustrated because a lot of times my exercise and my writing time conflicts, and then I don't know what to do because I go insane if I don't exercise and I go insane if I don't write. But the best time for both of those things is the morning. So when, yeah,
That's how I feel every day.
right,
And I have to pick one.
right. But you don't. Okay, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to pick one. So our only permanent home is in France. Behind our house, behind our village, there's a mountain. It takes about 45 minutes to get up. And what I would do is every morning I get up and I take my phone with me and I just use the notes. Like I just dictate to notes, and notes gets everything wrong. Like they cannot spell Uzbekistan.
Right.
But I.
Oh.
Jennifer, I think you froze.
Oh, she just disappeared.
Oh.
Okay.
No, I was learning so much.
I know. And I'm so sad that our time is almost up too, but let me, Jennifer, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to remove you from the stage and then re-invite you up and see if that helps. All right, I've removed her from the stage. Now I'm going to invite her back up, and we just have a few minutes anyway, but I do want to, all right, let's try it again and see if that works. And just one last reminder. Oh, there she is.
Oh,
She's
there
back.
you are.
So yeah, one last reminder, because we're almost out of time. And I'm sorry, Amber, that I cut your time short
It's okay.
with all my questions. But she's so fascinating. There's so many things, and I know everybody wants to ask her. But if anybody in the live virtual audience wants to come up on stage quick, here's your chance before we close out. So last chance, and then we'll give Amber a chance to ask another one last question.
Okay.
So Amber, just one sentence to finish up what I was saying was, okay,
Yeah.
so I just dictate stuff as I walk up the mountain because I get ideas while I'm writing. Movement helps. And then I just dictate it, and then I just email it to myself and copy and paste it into a Word document, and then I'm done with that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that is so great. Yeah, I wrote that down. I have like that long, Word document never ending where every time you have an idea, you just throw it onto there and it makes no sense. But it's, you got to do what you got to do to keep writing. So I love that advice. Thank you so much for that. And if I get one more question, I have to ask my favorite question. Oh, we have Debbie. I'll let Debbie come up.
Oh, favorite questions. I don't know what it is. Okay.
I don't want to interfere with that, Amber. Hi, you need to
It's
ask your
okay.
favorite question. I'm willing to wait. I want to hear it.
Oh, I just wanted to know if you have any advice for your younger writer self. So when you were first starting out, what advice would you have for yourself?
Leave the country earlier.
I love it.
Anyway, so that's my short answer, but I kind of mean it. Like, I feel like moving to somewhere that's very different from your home, even if it's somewhere else in your state or whatever, it just forces you to confront your own beliefs. And
oh, wow.
Anyway, Debbie, do you want to try to squeeze in a question here?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I want to squeeze in about 30 minutes of questions.
Me too.
You are so fascinating, Jennifer. I am enjoying this so much, and I have not read Exile Music yet, but I will be. And it's interesting. I'm reading right now Jennifer Rosner's The Yellow Bird Sings. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Same kind of story about a child prodigy. They're from Poland, a Jewish mother hiding her child and her music is her outlet, and it's just fascinating. But anyway, I know I have to talk fast here because we're close. But so I was really kind of interested. You said only 3 countries offered visas to Jews fleeing Germany: Bolivia, Japanese occupied Shanghai, China, and the Dominican Republic. That's an interesting 3 countries. Why were they offering asylum? I mean, what was the politics of Bolivia at the time? That's probably a lot of question. I can certainly Google some of it, but insight, please.
Yeah, or you can write to me. There's an email address on my website, and I can answer that. I mean, I can try to answer it shortly here, but each of those countries has different reasons. So Bolivia, Mauricio Hochschild, who was a mining baron, a Jewish mining baron, very rich, was friends with the president of Bolivia. And he said, hey, Hermann Busch, who's one of his parents was German, the president of Bolivia. He said, hey, would you consider letting some of these Jewish refugees into Bolivia if I promise they'll help the economy? And I'm going to help build these colonies, agricultural colonies where Jews can work, and, you know, it'll make Bolivia better. And so Hermann Busch said, okay, that sounds good.
Oh no. Are we freezing again? I guess it's a good thing we're at the end of our talk, but I'd like her to finish her question. So I'm just going to remove her from stage once more and try it one more time, and then we'll close out. So
Whoops. I think I am on the stage. Let's see.
all right, let's try that again. Oh, she's back.
There you are.
Great.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to finish your thought before we close out? Oh, now we're not hearing you. Are you muted? I don't see that you're muted.
Just
Yes. Yes.
you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I was muted. So right. So that's how Bolivia ended up letting in so many Jewish refugees. Is largely Mauricio Hochschild, who they refer to as the Schindler of Bolivia. And then in the Dominican Republic, so they just slaughtered a bunch of thousands and thousands of Haitians, like 10,000 Haitians. And so the leader, the president of the Dominican Republic at the time, wanted to kind of improve his reputation, look like a nice guy for taking in Jews. And another equally horrific reason they let in the Jews is they wanted to whiten the population. So they're doing a good thing for a terrible reason. And then Shanghai, I don't remember, so you'll have to look that up.
All fascinating. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll get off the stage. I know that it's just, I guess this just means that book clubs need to invite you to come visit with them.
Yes, please invite me. I love talking about books.
Yeah, and not
Well,
just
thank
book
you
clubs.
so
I
much.
want to have lunch with you and like talk about a million different things. So you got to promise me when your health returns and you're able to travel to the U.S., you'll look us up and we'll do an in-person event and we'll have lunch and chat about all of this fascinating stuff. But in the meantime, where can people find you, Jennifer? Are you on social media, website? What is the best way to find you?
So my website is jennifersteil.net. So it's just my name, but jennifersteil.net. And you can find me on Instagram, Jennifer F. Steil. My Twitter handle is at JFSteil7. You can find my books anywhere books are sold, pretty much. Yeah, that about covers it. So there is an email address via my website, so you can contact me through there as well as on social media, or I'm on Facebook as well. You just look for my name.
So you'll respond to people if they write you emails?
Yeah, I love getting emails from people. It's fantastic.
Oh.
I'm not yet so famous that I can't keep up with my my readership.
Yeah, and she's also now on Fireside. So if you click on Jennifer's icon and you'll see a little follow button, you can follow her so that anytime she comes back, you will be able to see when she's live and chat with her. And you can do the same for myself or for Amber. We do Adventures by the Book author interviews about once a week, and you'll get notice of when we're on here. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's Amber, sometimes it's both of us. So follow us both, and you'll have a lot of opportunities to meet authors. But in the meantime, one last mention of the beautiful book, Exile Music, which you can get on our website, or you can get at any bookseller or library, wherever you like to go to get your books. Jennifer, it's been a real pleasure. We wish you continued recovery in your health and best wishes for that. And I do hope you come back sometime. We'll look forward to your next book. For those of you who are following us, our next chat will be part 3 of our Thankful for Reading series with mystery writer Michelle Cox, who's going to be talking about her new book, A Spying Eye. So if you aren't familiar with Adventures by the Book, you can go to our website, adventuresbythebook.com, and find out more about our events. We do Zoom events, we do Fireside events, we do in-person events, we travel with authors. But our big event that we just announced yesterday is our Superbook 4 event, and it's 2 teams of 11 authors. That's right, 22 authors coming to San Diego in winter in February. Now, where do you want to be in winter? You want to be in San Diego, where the sun is shining. You can bask in our famous sunshine, but you can bask in literary greatness because we have 22 amazing authors for an all-day event. It's going to be so much fun, and it's one of our favorite events, and authors and readers too. So hope you join us there, adventuresbythebook.com. And it looks like we lost Jennifer, at least her visual, but I hope can you still hear us, Jennifer? No. Okay. Well, we want to thank her. It was a really fascinating discussion. The book is fascinating. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Amber, for your great questions. Debbie, thank you for hopping on stage. And until next time, everybody, what is your next adventure by the book? Bye, everybody.